Jersey Devil Encounters, a compilation of true stories from the Pine Barrens. These are the stories that haunt the darkest corners of New Jersey. Each one was shared with me by people who swear they truly lived them. Some gave me their names and precise locations. Others asked me to conceal the details for their safety. I have honored those requests. What you are about to hear are tales, not of legend, but of lived terror. If you think you know the Jersey Devil, listen closely. The Pine Barrens hold secrets that do not fade. Story 1. The screams came from the pines. I have lived most of my life with a healthy skepticism of ghost stories. My mother used to say that the woods were full of secrets, but I always assumed she meant deer and foxes, maybe the occasional black bear. But that night, the night the screams came from the pines, changed me forever. The memory has never left me. It clings to me like the pine sap that stains your hands after climbing too far into the trees. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the sound, as vivid as the moment I first heard it. Let me start at the beginning. It was late October. The air was sharp, and the leaves had turned brittle and red. My uncle had a cabin deep in the Pine Barrens, the kind of place you cannot find unless someone shows you the way. There is no cell service, no neighbors for miles, just endless trees and the hush of wind moving through them. I was 17 that fall, old enough to crave independence, but not old enough to understand what true fear really meant. My cousin Sam, a year younger and braver than me, invited me out to the cabin for a weekend of hiking, fishing, and what we called wilderness survival. My uncle, a retired game warden named Jack, was always thrilled to have us visit. He said the woods built character. We arrived Friday afternoon, our backpacks stuffed with too many snacks and too little practical gear. The drive-in was long, the roads shifting from asphalt to gravel, then to a sandy track lined with pitch pines and scrub oaks. The sun was already dipping behind the trees when we pulled up to the cabin, a squat, weathered structure with a tin roof and a porch that creaked under your feet. The first night was uneventful. We ate chili from a can, played cards by lantern light, and listened to my uncle's stories about lost hikers and strange lights in the woods. Sam and I rolled our eyes at most of it, chalking it up to his fondness for tall tales. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and we crawled into our bunks, the wood stove crackling comfortingly as we drifted to sleep. But that second night, Saturday, is when everything changed. We spent the day hiking the nearby trails, following the tracks of deer and raccoon through the underbrush. The pines seemed endless, their trunks twisting up into the gray sky. The air was cool, and the ground was soft with needles. Around midday, we found a pond choked with fallen branches, its surface still as glass. Sam tried to skip a stone, but the silence swallowed the sound, leaving only the faint rustle of wind. By dusk, we returned to the cabin, tired and hungry. My uncle cooked up a mess of eggs and potatoes, and we ate in near silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The woods felt closer that night, as if the darkness itself was pressing in on us. After dinner, we sat on the porch, bundled in sweatshirts, watching the last embers of sunset fade through the trees. My uncle sipped whiskey from a battered mug, his eyes distant. "Strange things out here sometimes," he said, almost to himself. Sam grinned. "Like what? Ghosts?" My uncle shrugged. "You never know what you'll find in the Barrens. Best to keep your wits about you." The conversation drifted after that, and eventually we retreated indoors, locking the door behind us more out of habit than real concern. We all went to bed early that night. I remember looking at the clock, 10:13 p.m., and thinking how quiet it was. The only sounds were the occasional pop from the wood stove and the steady breathing of Sam in the bunk above me. Sometime later, I woke abruptly. I do not know what pulled me from sleep, maybe a strange dream or a shift in the air. For a moment, I lay perfectly still, listening. That is when I heard it, footsteps outside, crunching through the thick mat of pine needles. Slow, deliberate, unhurried. They stopped, then started again, moving closer to the cabin. I held my breath, straining to hear more. Maybe it was a deer or a fox. Maybe even my uncle checking on something outside. Then, out of nowhere, the air was split apart by a scream. It was like nothing I had ever heard before. It began deep and low, then rose to an ear-splitting shriek that seemed to vibrate the very walls of the cabin. It was not a human scream. There was something animal about it, but twisted, unnatural, as if the woods themselves were crying out. I shot upright in bed, heart hammering in my chest. Sam woke instantly, clutching at his blanket, eyes wide with terror. "What was that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, the scream came again, closer this time, even louder. The sound seemed to reverberate through the floorboards, making the glass in the window rattle. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. My uncle burst into the room, his face pale, shotgun in hand. "Get away from the windows," he hissed, voice low and urgent. We did as we were told, scrambling into the center of the room. My uncle stood by the door, finger on the trigger, eyes fixed on the darkness outside. The screaming came again, moving through the trees. Sometimes it sounded distant, echoing through the pines. Other times, it was so close I could swear it was right outside the wall. Each time, it was the same, a deep, guttural howl that climbed into an inhuman screech, then cut off abruptly, leaving only the pounding of my heart in my ears. We stood there for what felt like hours, barely breathing, listening as the screams drifted farther away, then closer again, circling the cabin. At one point, something brushed against the side of the house. The walls shuddered, and the old tin roof creaked. My uncle raised the shotgun, his hands trembling just slightly. I remember thinking, whatever was out there, it knew we were inside. Finally, after what must have been half an hour, though it felt like an eternity, the screaming stopped. Silence fell, so complete that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. No one spoke. We stood in the dark, waiting for something, anything, to break the hush, but nothing came. Eventually, my uncle lowered the shotgun. "Stay away from the windows," he said again, voice hoarse. "I'm going to sit up for a while." Sam and I stumbled back to our bunks, but neither of us slept. I lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, every muscle tense. I could hear Sam's breathing, fast and shallow. Occasionally, the house creaked, or the wind stirred the branches outside, and my heart would leap into my throat. At some point, exhaustion must have overtaken me, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the window. The morning was deceptively calm. The woods outside looked ordinary, bathed in golden light, the air crisp and fresh. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it had all been a nightmare, but then I saw my uncle, still in his clothes from the night before, circles under his eyes, sitting on the porch with the shotgun across his knees. We walked the perimeter of the cabin, searching for any sign of what had happened. The ground was undisturbed, no footprints, no broken branches, nothing out of place. It was as if the night had swallowed all evidence of itself. But as we made our way to the car, Sam stopped abruptly. "Look," he said, pointing to the split rail fence that marked the edge of the property. There, snagged on a rough post, was a clump of hair, black, coarse, and impossibly long. Too long for a deer, too coarse for a dog. My uncle examined it, frowning deeply. "Let's get inside," he said, voice tight. We packed up quickly, barely speaking. The silence between us was heavy, the kind of silence that only fear can bring. On the drive home, Sam stared out the window, lost in thought. Finally, he turned to me. "What do you think it was?" he asked. I shook my head. "I don't know. I don't want to know." We never talked about it again, not really. My uncle sold the cabin a few months later, claiming it was too much work to maintain. I have not been back since. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind picks up and the woods outside my window rustle in the darkness, I remember that scream, raw, wild, and full of something that should not exist. It echoes in my dreams, a reminder that the Pine Barrens are full of secrets. Some are better left alone. I have told this story only a handful of times, and each time I see the same look in people's eyes, a mixture of skepticism and unease. Some laugh it off, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. Others grow quiet, as if they too have heard things in the night that defy explanation. But I know what I heard. I know what we all heard that night. The screams came from the pines, and they changed me forever. There are nights when I wake in a cold sweat, convinced that the sound is just outside my window. I tell myself it's only the wind or maybe a fox. But deep down, I know better. The woods remember. And some things, once heard, can never be forgotten. If you ever find yourself alone in the Pine Barrens, and the night grows too quiet, listen carefully. You might hear the footsteps, slow and deliberate, or the scream that splits the darkness. And if you do not look out the window. Do not try to see what is making that sound. Some secrets are better left in the dark. Story 2. Something flew over our campsite. If you have ever camped in the Pine Barrens, you know how the darkness settles in like a living thing. It wraps itself around your tent and presses into your lungs, thick and close, carrying the scent of pine sap, wet earth, and secrets older than memory. I used to love that feeling, the thrill of being out in the wild. Nothing between me and the stars, but a thin layer of canvas and my own bravado. But all that changed on the night, something flew over our campsite. There were 5 of us that weekend. We were all 17 or 18, old enough to drive, but still young enough to believe we were invincible. My best friend, Eddie, was the ringleader. He had an ancient blue pickup and a tent big enough for all of us, plus a cooler full of cheap beer and a speaker for playing music loud enough to annoy the ghosts. With us were Mike, tall and quiet with a laugh like breaking sticks, Lisa, who had a knack for always knowing when the fire needed feeding, and Jenny, my secret crush, who loved scary stories but hated being scared. We set up camp at a clearing near Batstow Lake. It was a spot Eddie's older brother had told him about, a place, he swore, where the trees thinned enough for a real campfire, but far enough from the trails that no one would bother us. We hauled our gear in by hand, trudging through sand and brush, and built the fire as the last orange light drained from the sky. The woods seemed endless, the trees pressing close, their silhouettes sharp against the fading blue. That first night, we did all the things teenagers do when they are free of adult eyes. We roasted marshmallows, told stories, and dared each other to walk into the woods alone. The music played low, and the shadows danced on the tent walls. I remember how safe I felt, surrounded by friends and firelight. The rest of the world held at bay by laughter and the crackling of burning wood. But the second night was different. It was colder, for one thing, and the fire seemed to cast more shadows than light. The moon was a thin sliver, barely enough to see by, and the woods felt restless, as if something was moving just beyond the edge of our vision. We had just finished a round of ghost stories. Eddie's favorite about the old woman who haunts the bog, Mike's tale of a lost hiker whose lantern can still be seen on foggy nights when the wind died. The woods fell perfectly still. The only sound was the hiss of the fire and the distant call of an owl. Anyone else feel weird? Lisa asked, hugging her knees to her chest. Just cold, Jenny replied, but her eyes darted to the darkness. Eddie grinned. You all are scared, admit it. Before any of us could answer, the firelight flickered and a shadow fell across the clearing. It happened so fast I thought I had imagined it, a sudden, chilling darkness that swept overhead, blotting out the stars. The fire guttered, and the air grew heavy, as if we were being watched by something vast and unseen. "What the hell was that?" Mike whispered. We all looked up, but the sky was empty. The trees swayed gently, their branches creaking. Then, as if on cue, we heard it, a low, throaty rustling, like wings beating against the air. It was too loud for a bird, too heavy, too deliberate. The sound moved above us, circling the campsite, and then faded into the woods. No one spoke. We sat frozen, staring into the fire, listening to our own heartbeats. Finally, Eddie broke the silence. "Probably just an owl," he said, forcing a laugh. But we all knew better. Owls do not cast shadows big enough to swallow a campsite. Owls do not make the ground tremble when they fly. We tried to laugh it off, but the mood had shifted. The woods felt different, closer, more alive. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see glowing eyes peering from the darkness. Even the fire seemed to shrink, its light barely reaching the edge of the clearing. We decided to call it a night. As we crawled into the tent, I noticed that the air was colder inside than out. My breath came in small, white clouds, and my hands shook as I zipped my sleeping bag. I tried to convince myself it was just nerves, that the mind plays tricks in the dark. But then, just as we were settling in, there was a scraping sound above us, like claws dragging across the nylon. The tent shuddered, and something heavy landed on the roof, pressing the fabric down toward our faces. Lisa screamed. Eddie grabbed the flashlight and shone it upward, but the beam caught only the bulge of the tent roof, sagging under the weight of something unseen. "Get out," Mike yelled, fumbling with the zipper. We spilled out of the tent in a tangle of limbs and sleeping bags, scrambling into the open. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the sand. Above us, the trees swayed, their branches creaking under the weight of something moving overhead. I looked up and saw it, just for a moment, a massive shape with wings outstretched, gliding silently between the treetops. Its body was long and thin, its wings leathery and tattered. I caught a glimpse of a long tail curling behind it like a whip, and two glowing red eyes that seemed to look straight through me. The creature circled once, then disappeared into the darkness, its wings beating the air with a sound like thunder. We stood there, frozen, too terrified to move. Jenny clung to my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Eddie's face was pale, his mouth working silently. "What was that?" Lisa whispered. No one answered. We packed up in silence, stuffing our gear into backpacks, not caring about order or weight. The fire was left to die, the tent abandoned. We stumbled down the trail, flashlights swinging wildly, every shadow a threat. Something crashed through the branches above us, keeping pace as we ran. I could hear the heavy beat of wings, the snap of twigs, the rustle of leaves. It followed us all the way to the car, staying just out of sight, its presence a constant pressure at our backs. We piled into the truck, slamming the doors, hearts pounding. Eddie fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice before finally starting the engine. We tore out of the parking lot, gravel spraying behind us, the headlights carving a narrow path through the darkness. No one spoke on the drive home. The radio stayed off. The only sound was the thrum of the tires and the ragged breathing of 5 teenagers who had seen something they could not explain. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events over and over. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a mass hallucination, an owl or a bat or some other animal. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something flew over our campsite that night. Something ancient, something wrong. I can still feel the weight of its gaze, the cold press of its shadow. We never talked about it again. Not really. If someone brought it up, we would laugh and change the subject. But I know we all remember. I see it in their eyes when we meet, the way we avoid looking into the woods, the way we flinch at the sound of wings beating overhead. Eddie never went back to that campsite. Mike gave up camping altogether. Lisa moved out of state for college and never came home for the summer. Jenny and I tried to date, but it never worked out. There was always something between us, a shadow we could not shake. But the memory remains, as sharp as the night air, as real as the fear that still wakes me up sometimes, heart racing, convinced that something is watching me from the darkness outside my window. If you ever find yourself in the Pine Barrens, sitting by a fire as the night closes in, listen carefully. Watch the sky, and if the stars go out, if the fire flickers and a shadow falls across your face, do not look up. Some things are better left unseen. That is the story of what happened to us. 5 friends, 1 campfire, and a night that changed everything. The Pine Barrens are full of stories. Ours is just one of many. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. Something flew over our campsite, and we were never the same. Story 3. The Jersey Devil was real. When I was a kid growing up in the outskirts of Leeds Point, New Jersey, I used to think the stories were just that, stories. Tales parents told their children to keep them from wandering too far into the woods or staying out after dark. The Jersey Devil was a punchline, a mascot, a local legend so old and so oft repeated that it lost all weight. But all that changed the night, I saw it for myself. I have replayed that night in my head countless times. The memory is etched into my mind, every detail sharp as glass. I have tried to find ways to explain it, to rationalize what I saw, but the truth is stubborn. The Jersey Devil is real. I saw it. And once you have seen it, you are never the same. Let me start at the beginning. It was late December, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. The sky was slate gray all day, and by the time night fell, everything seemed to have been drained of color. I was 16, newly licensed to drive, and full of that heady sense of freedom that comes with a set of keys in your pocket. That night, my friend Chris called me up. He wanted to hang out, maybe go for a drive, listen to music, and talk about girls. I picked him up around 9, and we cruised the back roads, windows cracked to let in the cold, the radio playing low. We talked about everything and nothing, the way teenagers do. Eventually, we ended up at a spot near Oyster Creek, a place where the woods opened up and you could see the stars if you looked hard enough. Chris lit a cigarette, and we sat on the hood of my car, our breath fogging in the air. We talked about the future, about getting out of this town, about all the things we thought we wanted. The woods around us were quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world has stopped turning. I do not remember what made us look up. Maybe it was a sound, something heavy moving in the trees, a branch snapping under the weight of something large. Maybe it was just instinct, that primal sense that something is watching you. All I know is that one moment we were laughing, and the next we were silent, staring into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing, just trees and shadows, the occasional glint of moonlight on frost. But then, between two twisted pines, I saw it. A shape, hunched and unnatural, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. It was tall, taller than any man, with legs that bent in the wrong places and arms that hung too long at its sides. Chris saw it too. I heard his breath catch, saw him drop his cigarette, the ember hissing out in the snow. We sat frozen, unable to move, as the creature stepped into the open. Its body was covered in coarse, dark fur, but its face, God, its face, was something out of a nightmare. Long and narrow, almost equine, but twisted wrong, with a mouth full of sharp, jagged teeth. Its eyes glowed red in the darkness, reflecting the beams of my headlights. For a moment, it just stood there, watching us. I felt a cold terror grip my chest, so strong I could not breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I could not move. Then, with a sudden, jerking motion, it spread its wings, massive, leathery things that unfolded with a sound like a tarp being shaken out. The wings stretched wider than the road, casting a shadow that swallowed the car. Chris whispered, "Holy," but the words died in his throat. The creature crouched, muscles bunching, and then it leaped into the air. The force of its takeoff sent a gust of wind and snow swirling around us. It rose above the trees, wings beating the air, and disappeared into the night. We sat there for a long time, shaking, too terrified to speak. Eventually, Chris broke the silence. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. I nodded, unable to form words. We did not talk about it on the drive home. We did not need to. The memory was enough. When I got home, I told my father what we had seen. He was a quiet man, not prone to excitement or exaggeration. He listened, nodded, and poured himself a drink. "Now you know," he said, his voice heavy with something I could not name. Over the next few days, I tried to make sense of what I had seen. I checked books from the library, searched online, asked questions in hushed tones at school. Most people laughed, called it a prank, a late-night hallucination. But a few, mostly the old-timers, the ones who had lived in the Barrens all their lives, just nodded, their eyes clouded with memories they never shared. One night, I found my father on the porch, staring out into the woods. I asked him if he had ever seen it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I was about your age, out by the old cranberry bogs. Heard a scream, a sound I'll never forget. Saw something move through the trees. Big, fast. Not a deer, not a bear. I never went back there after dark." I wanted to ask more, but he just shook his head and went inside. I started having nightmares. In them, I am back at the car, staring into the darkness, waiting for those red eyes to appear. Sometimes the creature lands on the hood, its claws scraping the metal. Sometimes it speaks, its voice a guttural rasp that echoes in my bones. I stopped going out at night. I stopped driving the back roads. Chris moved away the next year, and we lost touch. Whenever I see a story in the paper about strange sightings in the Barrens, livestock found dead, hoofprints in the snow, screams in the night, I feel a chill run down my spine. I know what I saw. I know it was real. There's a stretch of road near Leeds Point that I will not drive after sunset. The trees lean in over the asphalt, their branches tangled like fingers. On moonless nights, the shadows spill across the road, thick and impenetrable. Sometimes, when I have to drive that way, I keep my eyes straight ahead, refusing to look into the woods. But every now and then, I catch a glimpse, a flash of movement, a pair of glowing eyes, the shadow of wings stretched across the stars. I have never told anyone the whole story, not until now. Most people would not believe me. They would say it was a trick of the light, a deer caught in the headlights, a story told too many times. But I know what is out there. I have seen it. The Jersey Devil is real, and it is still waiting in the darkness. The years have not dulled my memory. If anything, the image has grown sharper, the fear more potent. I can still hear the sound of those wings, the way they cut the air, the way the trees seem to bow beneath their weight. I still dream about that night. In my dreams, I am back on the hood of my car, the snow falling softly around me, the woods alive with secrets. The creature steps out of the trees, eyes glowing, mouth twisted into a grin. It spreads its wings, and the world goes silent. I wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. I have tried to move on to forget, but the memory is a wound that never heals. It has colored every part of my life, my relationships, my choices, my sense of safety. I do not go into the woods anymore. I do not camp. I do not hike. I do not wander off the beaten path. Once, when I was in college, a friend invited me to a bonfire in the Barrens. I made an excuse, stayed home, and spent the night staring out my window, waiting for the sound of wings in the darkness. People say the Pine Barrens are haunted. They are right. But it is not ghosts or spirits that haunt those woods. It is something older, something hungry, something that walks on cloven hooves and watches from the shadows. If you ever find yourself on a lonely road in South Jersey, and the night is too quiet, and the trees seem to lean just a little too close, remember my story. Remember that some legends are real, and some monsters do not stay in the dark. The Jersey Devil is out there, waiting, watching, and I am living proof. Story 4. We saw wings in the fog. I have always loved the Pine Barrens in the morning, especially when the fog is thick and the world feels quiet, wrapped in a hush that makes every sound seem sacred. There is a beauty in that silence, a sense that the trees are holding their breath along with you. But on the day we saw wings in the fog, I learned that the barrens keep their secrets close, and sometimes those secrets are better left undisturbed. It was supposed to be a simple hike. My sister Natalie and I had been planning it for weeks, eager to escape the noise of the city and lose ourselves in the wilderness. We packed light, water, granola bars, a map, and our phones, though we knew reception would be spotty at best. The Batona Trail was our destination, a winding path through some of the oldest and wildest parts of the Barrens. We arrived just after dawn, parking the car at a half-forgotten trailhead marked by a faded sign and a pile of leaves. The fog was so thick we could barely see the tops of the trees, their branches fading into the gray. The air was cold and damp, every breath a cloud. Natalie grinned at me, excitement in her eyes. "Race you to the first marker," she said, and took off down the trail. I followed, laughing, our footsteps muffled by the carpet of needles and moss. We fell into an easy rhythm, the world shrinking to the narrow tunnel of the trail, bounded on all sides by walls of fog and shadow. For the first hour, it was perfect. We talked about everything, work, school, the kinds of things you never seem to have time for in real life. The fog made the woods feel enchanted, every tree a ghost, every sound magnified. We stopped to listen to the distant call of a woodpecker, the drip of water from the branches, the soft skitter of something small in the underbrush. But as the sun climbed higher, the fog refused to lift. If anything, it grew thicker, swirling around us in damp, shifting waves. The trees became silhouettes, their shapes distorted and strange. The path narrowed, the ground soft underfoot. That is when we heard it, a slow, heavy flapping, like sails billowing in an unseen wind. The sound came from somewhere above us, muffled by the fog, rhythmic and deliberate. We stopped walking, instinctively drawing closer together. The sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed to fill the air around us. I looked up, searching the gray for any sign of movement. Out of the mist, a massive shape blurred overhead, wings huge, leathery, and impossibly wide, sliced through the fog, sending swirls of vapor spiraling in their wake. The creature moved with a smooth, predatory grace, its body little more than a shadow, its wingspan easily double the width of the trail. Natalie gasped, grabbing my arm. I could feel her trembling, her fingers digging into my jacket. We ducked instinctively, hearts pounding, as the shape circled above us, its wings beating the air with a sound like distant thunder. For a moment, I caught a glimpse, a long, sinuous tail trailing behind, the curve of horns silhouetted against the gray, claws clutching a broken branch as it glided through the trees. The creature circled once, twice, then vanished into the whiteness, leaving only the echo of its wings and the ragged edge of fear. We stood there, rooted by terror, afraid to move. The fog pressed in on all sides, muffling the world, making it feel as though we were trapped in a dream. "Did you see that?" Natalie whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, unable to speak. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. We waited, listening for the sound of wings, afraid that the creature might return. But the woods were silent, the fog swallowing every sound. When we finally started walking again, our steps were slow and cautious. We stayed close together, eyes scanning the trees, every shadow a threat. The fog made it impossible to tell how far we had gone. The trail seemed to twist and double back on itself, the markers growing harder to find. At one point, we came to a clearing where the fog was thinner. The ground was churned up, branches snapped and scattered in the center of the clearing. The earth was marked with deep furrows, as though something heavy had landed there. The air was thick with a strange, sulfurous smell, sharp and unpleasant. Natalie knelt to examine the ground, her hands shaking. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "These aren't deer tracks," she said. I crouched beside her, studying the marks. They were unlike anything I had ever seen, deep, three-toed impressions, each nearly the size of my hand. The furrows radiated outward in a spiral, as if something had spun in place before taking off again. We left the clearing in a hurry. The memory of those wings burned into our minds. The fog seemed to close in behind us, swallowing the evidence, erasing all trace of what we had seen. The rest of the hike was a blur. We walked quickly, barely speaking, jumping at every sound. The fog never lifted, and the woods felt endless, the trail winding on and on with no sign of civilization. When we finally reached the car, we collapsed into the seats, exhausted and shaken. Natalie started the engine, her hands trembling on the wheel. "Let's never do that again," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. I agreed. We drove home in silence, the radio off, the fog clinging to the car like a shroud. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see wings unfolding in the mist behind us. For days afterward, I tried to make sense of what we had seen. I searched online for explanations, large birds, weather phenomena, tricks of the light, but nothing fit. The tracks, the smell, the sheer size of those wings, none of it made sense. Natalie refused to talk about it. Whenever I brought it up, she would shake her head and change the subject, but I could see the fear in her eyes, the The way she flinched at the sound of birds overhead. The way she avoided the woods, even in broad daylight. I started having nightmares. In them, I am back on the trail, the fog pressing in, the sound of wings growing louder, closer. Sometimes the creature lands in front of me, its eyes glowing red, its mouth full of teeth. Sometimes it simply hovers above, watching, waiting. I have not been back to the Batona Trail since that day. I avoid the Barrens altogether, choosing parks and trails closer to town, places where the trees are smaller and the air is clear. But the memory lingers. I see those wings every time the fog rolls in, every time the world grows quiet and the woods seem to hold their breath. I hear the beating of wings in the silence, the echo of something old and hungry moving through the trees. I have told this story to a few people over the years. Most laugh, call it a hallucination, a trick of the mind. Some listen quietly, their faces pale, their eyes distant. But I know what I saw. I know what we saw. Wings in the fog, massive, leathery, impossible. A creature that should not exist, moving through the barrens as if it owned the place. If you ever find yourself hiking in the Pine Barrens on a foggy morning, listen carefully. Watch the sky, and if you hear the sound of wings above you, do not look up. Some things are better left unseen. Story 5. The creature landed on our roof. Some people will tell you that the Jersey Devil is just a story, a campfire tale, an old wives' warning to keep kids from wandering too far into the pines. But I know it's real because it came to my house one stormy night and landed on my roof. I can still hear the thud, still remember the way the whole house seemed to shudder beneath its weight. Some nights, when the wind shakes the windows and the pine trees scrape against the siding, I wonder if it's come back for me. I was living alone that winter in a small house at the edge of the Pine Barrens. The town itself was little more than a gas station, a bar, and a post office, all clustered along a single cracked road. My house was set back from the main drag, surrounded by a tangle of pitch pines and brambles, with only a dirt path leading up to the porch. It was the kind of place you chose if you wanted to be left alone, and at the time, that's exactly what I wanted. It was late January, and the storms had been rolling in for days. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and wood smoke, and the wind howled through the trees every night. I was used to strange noises, the thump of pine cones landing on the roof, the skitter of squirrels in the attic, the distant bark of coyotes. But that night was different from the start. The storm hit just after sunset, a wall of rain and wind that rattled the windows and bent the trees nearly double. I made myself a cup of tea and settled in with a book, pulling a blanket around my shoulders as thunder rolled across the sky. The power flickered a few times, but never quite went out. I could see the trees swaying outside, their branches whipping back and forth in the wind. By midnight, the worst of the storm had passed, but the wind was still fierce, moaning through the eaves and sending leaves and twigs clattering against the siding. I was about to go to bed when I heard it, a heavy thud on the roof, so loud it made the picture frames on the wall tremble. I froze, the mug halfway to my lips, and listened. At first, I thought it must be a branch, torn loose by the wind. But then I heard it again, a slow, deliberate scraping, like claws dragging across the shingles. The sound moved from one end of the roof to the other, pausing above my bedroom before continuing toward the front of the house. My heart hammered in my chest. I turned off all the lights and crept to the window, careful not to make a sound. The porch light flickered in the wind, casting wild shadows across the yard. I saw nothing unusual, just the trees bending and groaning, and the empty dirt path leading back to the road. Then something slammed against the vent pipe on the roof. The whole house shook, and dust rained down from the ceiling. I stumbled backward, clutching the edge of the table, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I grabbed my phone and dialed my neighbor Linda, who lived about a quarter mile down the road. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy. "Linda, something's on my roof," I whispered, trying not to let my voice shake. She was silent for a moment, then said, "Stay inside. Don't make any noise. I'll be there as soon as I can." The scraping grew louder, moving back and forth across the roof. I could hear the crunch of shingles, the creak of wood under weight. It sounded like whatever was up there was searching for a way in. I turned off my phone's screen and pressed my back against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. Every muscle in my body was tense. I listened as the creature paced above me, its claws raking the shingles, sometimes pausing as if it was listening for me. Then, as suddenly as it had arrived, it launched itself off the roof. There was a huge, gusty whoosh of air, and the house shook so hard I thought the windows might break. I heard branches snapping in the yard, the crash of something heavy landing beyond the porch. The silence that followed was absolute. I waited, counting my heartbeats, barely daring to breathe. Linda's headlights appeared a few minutes later, cutting through the darkness. She ran to the porch, a flashlight in one hand and a baseball bat in the other. I let her in, locking the door behind us. We searched the house, then stepped outside together, the wind biting at our faces. The yard was a mess, branches everywhere, the trash cans knocked over, but nothing else out of place. In the morning, when the sun finally rose, I went outside to survey the damage. The roof was gouged in 3 places, the shingles torn up and scattered across the yard. The gutter was bent where something heavy had slammed into it, but it was the window frame above my bedroom that made my blood run cold. 3 deep claw marks, each nearly a foot long, dug into the wood. I called my landlord, who came out to look. He shook his head, muttering about raccoons and bears, but I could see the fear in his eyes. Linda made me coffee and sat with me on the porch. She said she'd heard stories all her life, stories about the devil of the pines, about things that landed on roofs in the middle of the night and left claw marks behind. She told me about a neighbor who had found hoofprints on her roof after a storm, about a hunter who claimed to have seen a creature with wings as wide as a car. I moved out a week later. I could not sleep in that house, not with the memory of that night echoing in my mind. I still wake sometimes to the sound of claws scraping on shingles, the thud of something landing overhead. People ask me why I left the Barrens. I tell them it was the storms, the isolation, the endless nights alone. But that's not the truth. The truth is, I saw something that should not exist. I heard it, felt it, and I know it's still out there, waiting for the next storm, the next lonely house at the edge of the woods. If you ever hear something land on your roof in the dead of night, do not go outside. Lock your doors, turn off your lights, and pray that whatever it is moves on. Because some things are not meant to be seen. Some things belong to the Barrens, to the darkness, to the wild places where the light does not reach. I will never forget the sound of those claws, the weight of that presence above me, the sense that I was being hunted in my own home. The Jersey Devil is real. I know because it landed on my roof. Story 6. Something was hunting deer in the forest. There are things that move through the Pine Barrens that do not fear the dark. Most nights, it is just foxes, raccoons, or the silent shadows of deer weaving between the trees. But that morning, before the sun had fully burned the mist from the ground, I learned what it feels like to be prey, to sense the presence of something older, something hungry, that does not belong to the world of men. I grew up on the edge of the Barrens, in a house my grandfather built with his own hands. The woods behind our property stretched for miles, broken only by old hunting trails and the winding path of a half-forgotten creek. My brother Jake and I learned to read those woods the way other kids learned to read books. We knew the difference between the clatter of a squirrel's claws and the heavy tread of a buck. We could tell by the angle of a snapped twig or the freshness of a print whether we were being watched or left alone. We hunted those woods every fall, rising before dawn to drink coffee with Dad in the kitchen and pull on layers of flannel and wool. Hunting was more than sport. It was tradition, a way to be part of something bigger than ourselves. We moved through the woods with respect, taking only what we needed, never leaving trash or sign of our passing. That year, the deer were acting strange. They moved in smaller groups, skittish and restless, bedding down in places we had never seen them before. The old men at the diner whispered about coyotes, about a rise in the bobcat population, but Jake and I knew the woods better than anyone. We did not see coyotes scat, did not hear the yipping calls at night. Something else was making the deer uneasy. It was late November, cold enough that the grass crackled underfoot, but not so cold that that the streams had frozen over. Jake and I set out before first light, our rifles slung over our shoulders, our boots muffled by the thick carpet of needles. The world was still, the only sounds the distant call of an owl and the soft susurrus of wind in the pines. We found our first sign a quarter mile from the house, a patch of ground torn up, the leaves scattered, the earth churned as if something heavy had thrashed there. In the center of the disturbance lay the remains of a young deer, its body ripped open, the ribs exposed and gleaming in the pale light. Blood soaked the ground, already drying to black. The kill was fresh, no more than an hour old. Jake crouched beside the carcass, his breath clouding in the cold air. "Coyote," he whispered. I shook my head. The wounds were too deep, the flesh torn in ragged strips. No coyote or bobcat could do that kind of damage. We circled the clearing, searching for tracks. There were hoofprints, of course, panicked, scattered in every direction. But around the carcass, pressed deep into the mud, were prints I had never seen before. Three-toed, each as long as my hand, ending in sharp, gouged impressions that looked like claws. Jake knelt to examine them, his face tight with unease. "What the hell is that?" I had no answer. We followed the tracks as they led away from the clearing, moving deeper into the woods. The prints were erratic, sometimes close together, sometimes spaced far apart, as if whatever had made them could leap great distances. The trees closed in around us, the light growing dim even as the sun rose higher. About half a mile in, we heard it, a distant, guttural growl that echoed through the pines. It was a sound I had never heard before, low and resonant, vibrating in my chest like the bass note of a great drum. We froze, scanning the trees, rifles raised. Something large moved through the underbrush nearby, moving with a heavy, deliberate tread. Branches snapped, the sound carrying farther than it should have in the damp air. I glimpsed a shape between the trunks, tall, hunched, moving on two legs, its body covered in coarse, dark fur. Jake grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my sleeve. "We need to go," he whispered. We began to retreat, moving as quietly as we could, keeping our eyes on the trees. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the creature step into the open. We made it back to the clearing, then to the trail, moving faster as the woods seemed to close in around us. The sense of being watched grew stronger, oppressive, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. At the edge of the property, we stopped to catch our breath. Jake's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Did you see it?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak. We told Dad what we had found. He listened, his face grave, then told us to stay out of the woods for a few days, to let things settle down. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. That night, I lay awake, listening to the sounds outside. The wind rattled the windows, and every so often, I thought I heard something moving in the yard. A heavy, shuffling step. The crack of a branch. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day, trying to convince myself it was just a bear, just a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, we found more tracks, circling the house, pressed deep into the frost. The prints led to the edge of the yard, then disappeared into the woods. No other animal dared come near. The birds were silent, the squirrels gone. Jake refused to hunt after that. He said he had lost his taste for it, but I knew the truth. He was afraid, just like me. Weeks passed, and the deer returned, though they remained wary, always glancing over their shoulders, always ready to bolt at the slightest sound. The tracks faded, the carcasses stopped appearing, but the sense of unease lingered. Sometimes, when I am alone in the woods, I hear that growl again, low and distant, a reminder that we are not the only hunters in the barrens. Sometimes I find tufts of black hair snagged on a branch, or claw marks on the trunk of a tree. I have stopped trying to explain it. Some things are not meant to be understood. Some things are meant to be feared. If you ever find yourself in the Pine Barrens before dawn, and the woods fall silent, trust your instincts. Leave the deer to their fate. Get out while you can, because something is hunting in those woods, and it is not looking for you until it is. Story 7. The devil of the pines found us first. Some people go looking for trouble, for the thrill of a scare. Others just stumble into it, caught up in something they never meant to find. I was one of the latter. I never believed the stories about the Jersey Devil. Not really. Not until it found us first. It was the last Saturday before school started, a thick, humid night at the tail end of August. My friends and I wanted one last adventure before the world shrank back to classrooms and homework. There were 5 of us, me, my best friend Corey, our neighbor Adam, and the twins, Lee and Lucas. We were all 15, restless and bored, convinced we were braver than we actually were. We'd heard about an old railbed that cut through the heart of the Pine Barrens, abandoned tracks swallowed by trees and time. Adam's older brother swore he'd seen strange lights out there, heard weird cries echoing through the woods. He told us the devil of the pines liked to walk the rails on moonless nights, looking for lost souls to claim. We all laughed, but the way he told it stuck with us. It was the kind of dare you couldn't resist. We met at sunset, each of us bringing a bike and a flashlight. Adam had a backpack full of snacks, and Corey had his dad's old hunting knife strapped to his belt. The railbed started just outside town, a gravel path lined with wild blueberry bushes and poison ivy. The sun bled red through the branches as we pedaled into the trees, our laughter carrying on the still, sticky air. The woods swallowed us quickly. The further we rode, the quieter it became, the trees crowding close, their branches arching overhead like the ribs of a beast. The path narrowed, and soon it was just 2 rusty lines of track cutting through the undergrowth. We rode side by side, our tires crunching over gravel, our voices softening to whispers. After a mile or so, we stopped for snacks, sitting on a rotting railroad tie while fireflies blinked in the shadows. Lucas told a ghost story, something about a headless brakeman searching for his lantern, and Lee rolled her eyes, tossing a pebble at him. It was full dark when we started moving again. The moon was a thin sliver, barely enough to see by, and the woods pressed in closer than ever. My flashlight beam flickered over tangled vines and fallen branches, the world shrinking to a tunnel of pale yellow light. That's when we heard it, the sound of footsteps behind us. Heavy, uneven, crunching through the brush in a way no deer or fox could manage. We stopped, listening, our breath caught in our throats. "Probably a deer," Adam whispered. "No deer walks like that," Lee replied, her voice shaking. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. For a moment, the woods were silent, the only sound the thump of my heart in my ears. Then something screamed, a high, keening cry that rose and fell, echoing through the trees. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard, part animal, part human, full of pain and rage. Corey dropped his bike and ran into the bushes to be sick. The rest of us stood frozen, staring into the darkness. The footsteps started again, circling us, moving just out of sight. I swept my flashlight beam back and forth, desperate to see, desperate not to see. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the light, half hidden by a tangle of briars, something moved. It was tall, hunched, its skin the color of old bark. Wings folded tight against its back, claws digging into the earth. Its eyes glowed red, catching the beam of my light and throwing it back at me in twin points of fire. It took a step forward, and the ground seemed to shudder. The wings unfurled, massive and leathery, stretching wider than I was tall. The head was long and narrow, with horns curving back from the skull and a mouth full of jagged teeth. I heard someone, maybe me, whisper, "No, no, no." The devil of the pines stared at us, silent and unblinking. Then it screamed again, the sound so loud I felt it in my bones, and leapt into the air. The wings beat once, twice, sending a rush of wind through the clearing. The trees bent away from it, leaves swirling in a wild dance. We ran. We abandoned our bikes, stumbling through the undergrowth, tripping over roots and fallen logs. The screams followed us, sometimes near, sometimes impossibly far. Branches clawed at my arms, thorns tore at my jeans. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, and then I dragged myself onward by sheer panic. At some point, we burst out onto an old dirt road. The moonlight was brighter here, the trees thinner. We collapsed in a heap, gasping for breath, our bodies shaking. Lee sobbed, her face buried in her hands. Lucas stared into the woods, eyes wide and empty. Corey was pale as a ghost, his hands still clutching the handle of his flashlight in a death grip. Adam just kept muttering, "It's not real, it's not real," over and over. We sat there for a long time, too afraid to move, too afraid to look back. Eventually, we gathered the courage to go back for our bikes. They were right where we'd left them, scattered across the railed, their frames tangled in weeds. The woods were silent now, the only sound the distant call of a nightjar and the soft sigh of wind through the pines. We rode home in silence, staying close together, our flashlights pointed straight ahead. When we reached the edge of town, the streetlights felt like salvation. None of us talked about what happened that night. Not really. If someone mentioned it, we'd laugh and change the subject, pretending it was just a story, just our imaginations playing tricks on us. But I know what I saw. I know what we all saw. The devil of the pines found us first. We didn't go looking for it. We didn't want to believe. But now, when I hear footsteps in the night, when I catch a glimpse of red eyes in the shadows, I remember that night on the railed. I don't go into the woods after dark anymore. Neither do my friends. Some stories are warnings, not invitations. If you ever find yourself on an old railed in the heart of the Barrens, and the night is too quiet, and the wind dies, and the trees lean close, listen carefully. If you hear footsteps in the dark, don't turn around. Don't look. Just run. Because sometimes you don't find the devil, he finds you. Story 8. We followed the screams into the dark. If you have ever heard a scream deep in the woods, a scream that does not sound like any animal, does not sound like any person, you know the feeling that comes next. It is like ice in your veins, a prickling up your spine, an ancient warning from some part of you that remembers a time when humans were not the apex predators. I learned this lesson the hard way, the night my friends, and I followed the screams into the dark. It started as a dare, as these things often do. There were 3 of us that night. Me, my friend Dylan, and our mutual friend Tara. We were bored, restless, and looking for something to do on a Saturday night that did not involve the usual parties or the same old stories at the diner. The Pine Barrens loomed at the edge of town, a black tangle of trees and shadows. We had all grown up with the stories, the Jersey Devil, the lost travelers, the ghost lights, but we never really believed them. That night, though, something was different. We were parked at the end of a dirt road, the windows rolled down to let in the cool night air. The cicadas had gone quiet, and even the frogs in the distant marshes had fallen silent. The only light came from the dashboard, and the moon, barely visible through the clouds. Tara was telling some story about a haunted bridge when Dylan held up a hand. SHH. Listen, he said. At first, I heard nothing. Then, cutting through the hush, came a sound, a scream high and keening, echoing through the trees. It was not an animal's cry, not a fox or owl. It was too long, too strange, somehow both guttural and shrill, as if something was in pain or in rage. We looked at each other, hearts pounding. Tara's eyes were wide, her breath coming fast. What "What the hell was that?" she whispered. Dylan grinned, but it was a nervous grin. "Let's find out." I should have said no. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to lock the doors, to drive away and never look back. But I was 16, and pride is a stupid thing. I grabbed my flashlight and got out of the car, Dylan right behind me. Tara hesitated, then joined us, her arms wrapped tight around her chest. We started down the trail, our footsteps muffled by the thick mat of pine needles. The woods were black, the trees pressing close. The scream came again, closer this time, and we all stopped in our tracks. "Maybe it's just a coyote," I said, but my voice sounded small and unconvincing. Dylan shook his head. "Coyotes don't sound like that." We pushed on, the beam of my flashlight trembling as I swept it over the undergrowth. The scream came again, farther off now, as if whatever was making it was moving through the woods, leading us deeper. We followed, nerves fraying with every step. The path twisted and turned, the trees growing thicker and taller, blocking out what little light the moon provided. The air was cold and damp, heavy with the scent of moss and decaying leaves. Suddenly, the screaming stopped. The silence was immediate, total, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. We stopped, listening, our hearts thundering in our chests. "Maybe we should go back," Tara whispered. But Dylan was already moving forward, his flashlight pointed straight ahead. "We're close," he said. We came to a small clearing, a patch of ground where the needles had been swept away, the earth churned and bare. In the center of the clearing was a mound of feathers and blood. Something had died here recently. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, and something else, something sharp and sulfurous. "Jesus," I muttered, turning away. That's when we saw the footprints, hoofprints deep and wide, pressed into the soft earth. They led away from the clearing deeper into the trees. There were claw marks, too, gouged into the bark of a nearby pine. Tara bent down to look, her hands shaking. "These aren't deer tracks," she said. "They're wrong." Dylan glanced at me, his bravado slipping. "Maybe we should go." But even as he said it, we heard movement in the trees, branches snapping, leaves rustling. Something large moving just out of sight. My flashlight flickered, then died, plunging us into darkness. Panic surged through me. I grabbed Tara's hand, and we stumbled back the way we had come, Dylan close behind. The woods were alive with sound now, twigs snapping, something breathing heavily, the soft thud of hooves on earth. We ran, not caring about direction, just desperate to escape. The trees blurred past, shadows dancing at the edge of my vision. I could hear Tara sobbing, Dylan cursing under his breath. At some point, we burst out onto a sandy trail, the car visible in the distance. We sprinted for it, lungs burning, hearts pounding. I fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice, before finally unlocking the doors. We piled inside, slamming the doors, locking them tight. I started the engine, and we tore out of there, the headlights carving a path through the night. No one spoke on the drive home. Tara stared out the window, her face pale. Dylan stared at his hands, trembling. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see glowing eyes in the darkness. We never talked about what happened that night. If someone brought it up, we would laugh it off, call it a prank, a trick of the mind. But the memory lingers. Sometimes, late at night, I hear that scream in my dreams, echoing through the woods. Sometimes I wake up convinced that something is watching me from the trees outside my window. I do not go into the barrens at night anymore. Neither do Dylan or Tara. We learned our lesson. Some sounds are warnings, not invitations. If you ever hear a scream in the woods, a scream that does not belong to any animal you know, do not follow it. Do not let curiosity lead you deeper into the dark. Because sometimes, when you follow the screams, you find something that was waiting for you all along. Story 9. The Hoofprints appeared overnight. There are mornings in the Pine Barrens when the world feels untouched, ancient, and eerily still. This was one of those mornings, and it began like any other, with the quiet hush of a winter sunrise and the faint crackle of frost beneath my boots. But it ended with a mystery that still haunts me, one marked by a trail of hoofprints that no animal could have made. I grew up in a farmhouse on the edge of the barrens, far enough from the nearest neighbor that you could scream your head off and no one would hear. Our family had lived there for generations, tending chickens, patching fences, and keeping to ourselves. My mother always said the land remembered everything, the good, the bad, and the things best left unspoken. It was mid-January, the kind of cold that turned your breath white and left ice on the inside of the windows. The night before had brought freezing rain, coating everything in a slick, glassy shell. I woke early, as I always did, to let our old beagle, Rusty, out before breakfast. The sky was a pale, bruised purple, the air full of that hush that only comes before the world stirs awake. I pulled on my boots and opened the door. Rusty bounded outside, eager to nose around the yard. That's when I saw them, tracks in the icy crust, too deep and too perfect to be made by any farm animal, or for that matter, any creature I'd ever seen. The prints were shaped like hooves, but they were larger than any deer's, and spaced in a way that made no sense. They started by the back porch, circled the chicken coop, wound around the old shed, and disappeared into the woods beyond the fence. Each print was crisp and sharply defined, pressed deep into the ice, as if something heavy had walked with purpose, never breaking stride, never hesitating. I called for Rusty, who came trotting back, hackles raised, growling low in his throat. He sniffed at the prints, then backed away, tail between his legs. I felt a prickle of fear crawl up my spine. I'd seen deer tracks, coyote tracks, even the odd black bear, but nothing like this. My mother came out to see what the fuss was about. She stopped dead when she saw the prints, her face going pale. "It's back," she whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear. "What's back?" I asked, my voice barely more than a breath. She shook her head, not meeting my eyes. "Just get inside. I'll call your grandfather." While she was on the phone, I stared at the tracks, following them as far as I dared. They never broke stride, never paused, even when they crossed the frozen creek at the edge of the property. The ice wasn't broken, just a perfect line of prints leading into the trees. My grandfather arrived a half-hour later, bundled in his old wool coat, face set in grim lines. He walked the perimeter with me, tracing the path of the prints. He didn't say much, just grunted and muttered under his breath. When we got back to the house, he sat down at the kitchen table and poured himself a cup of coffee. "You ever heard of the Leeds Devil?" he asked me. I nodded. Everyone around here knew the story. The Jersey Devil, the monster of the Barrens, born of a curse and doomed to haunt the pine woods forever. He leaned in closer. "My father found prints like these years ago. After a storm, just like this. They circled the house, same as now. He said he heard something walking on the roof, claws scraping the shingles. Found chicken feathers scattered all over the yard, but not a drop of blood." He looked at me, his eyes hard. "You see anything strange, you come get me. Don't go looking for trouble." The prints stayed visible all day, the ice too thick to melt, even as the sun rose higher. Neighbors drifted by, drawn by the rumor mill that runs faster than wildfire in a small town. Some shook their heads and muttered about pranksters, but most just stared, uneasy, crossing themselves before heading home. That night, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. I barely slept, every creak and groan of the house making me jump. I dreamed of something tall and thin, with legs like a goat and wings that blotted out the stars, circling the house, peering in through the frosted glass. In the morning, the prints were gone. The sun had melted the ice, turning the yard into a sea of mud. But the memory lingered, sharp and vivid. Over the years, I've seen the tracks a few more times, always after a storm, always circling the house or winding through the fields. Sometimes, the chickens will refuse to leave the coop, or Rusty will whine and hide under the porch for days. I've never seen the creature that makes them, but I know it's out there. I know the stories aren't just stories. A few years back, my neighbor, Mrs. Wilkerson, found prints on her roof after a blizzard. She said it sounded like something heavy was pacing back and forth all night, scraping at the shingles. When she went outside in the morning, the snow was marked with hoofprints, leading from the roof to the woods. She moved away not long after that. People in town still talk. They say the devil walks the barrens in winter, searching for something, leaving his mark for those who know how to look. They say he's a warning, a reminder that some places are wild and dangerous, and always will be. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I followed those prints into the woods, if I let curiosity overcome fear. But I never do. I remember my grandfather's words, "Don't go looking for trouble." If you ever wake to find hoofprints in your yard, don't follow them. Don't try to explain them away. Just close your door, lock your windows, and wait for the sun to rise. Because some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some things are meant to remain in the dark, walking the barrens long after we're gone. And if you listen on the coldest nights, you might hear it, the soft thud of hooves on frozen earth, the whisper of wings in the shadows. The Pine Barrens remember, the devil's mark is never far. Story 10. We never returned to the Pine Barrens. I have heard it said that the Pine Barrens are a place you either love or escape, that the woods have a memory and a will of their own. I never truly believed that, at least, not until the weekend I learned that some places are not meant for people, and some stories do not end with the dawn. This is the story of why I will never return to the Pine Barrens. It is not just mine, but also belongs to my friends whose lives were changed alongside mine on a trip we thought would be just another harmless adventure. There were 3 of us, me, my best friend Rachel, and her boyfriend Chris. We had been close since high school, always looking for new places to explore, new trails to hike, new nights to spend under the stars. Rachel had inherited a small, weather-beaten cabin from her uncle, tucked far down a rutted sand road outside Warren Grove. It was the kind of place that didn't show up on any map, surrounded by endless trees, thick with undergrowth, and wrapped in the heavy silence only deep woods can offer. We planned to stay for 2 nights. It was early October, the air crisp and the leaves just starting to turn. Our plan was simple: hike, fish, drink, and tell stories by the fire. We arrived late Friday afternoon, the sun already low, painting the woods gold and red. The cabin was small but cozy, the porch sagging, the inside filled with the smells of cedar and old books. The first night was easy. We unpacked, made chili over the old propane stove, and played cards by lantern light. The woods outside were alive with the usual sounds: crickets, frogs, the distant bark of a fox. I remember feeling at peace, the kind of peace that comes only when you are far from the world. The second day, we hiked a long loop through the forest, tracing barely visible trails past cranberry bogs and ancient, wind-twisted pines. We found a creek, cold and clear, and skipped stones until our hands ached from the chill. The sky was cloudless, the air full of bird calls, and for a time, it felt like we were the only people left on Earth. We got back to the cabin just before dusk, tired and hungry. Chris started a fire in the old stone ring outside, while Rachel and I made sandwiches and poured mugs of coffee. As the light faded, the woods grew quiet, quieter than the night before. The silence was so total, so heavy, that we all noticed it. Even the wind seemed to still, the branches unmoving, the leaves frozen in place. As darkness settled, we sat close around the fire, telling stories and sipping whiskey from enamel mugs. Rachel Rachel told the story about the ghost lights she'd seen as a kid. Chris tried to scare us with tales of the Jersey Devil, but we all laughed, more out of nerves than amusement. Then, from deep in the woods, we heard it, a scream, high and ragged, echoing through the trees. It was a sound I will never forget, a sound that did not belong to any animal I knew. It rose and fell, then was joined by another, and another, until it sounded like a chorus of voices crying out in pain and anger. We stared at each other, the fire casting long shadows on our faces. Chris tried to joke, saying it was just a fox or a coyote, but his voice trembled. Rachel gripped my hand, her knuckles white. The screams circled the cabin, sometimes distant, sometimes impossibly close. The fire seemed smaller, the darkness pressing in on all sides. I felt something watching us, something old and patient and hungry. At some point, the screams stopped as suddenly as they had begun. The silence that followed was worse, deep and oppressive. We doused the fire and hurried inside, locking the doors and windows. None of us slept. Every creak of the floor, every groan of the walls made us jump. In the early hours, something began to circle the cabin. We heard footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate, moving through the brush, sometimes stopping, sometimes scraping against the walls. Once, something rattled the trash cans on the porch. Another time, a window shuddered, as if something heavy had leaned against it. We whispered to each other, too afraid to turn on the lights, the only illumination the faint glow from the dying embers in the stove. The footsteps continued, sometimes receding, sometimes coming right up to the front door. At dawn, the noises stopped. The woods outside were still. The only movement the slow drift of mist between the trees. We stepped outside, hearts pounding, and surveyed the yard. The ground was churned up, the fire ring scattered, the trash cans knocked over and dented. The door bore 3 deep gouges, as if something with claws had tried to force its way in. We found hoofprints in the soft earth, circling the cabin, spiraling out toward the woods. Rachel burst into tears, and Chris stood silent, staring into the trees. We packed in silence, throwing our things into bags, not caring about order. We left food, clothes, even a fishing rod behind. All we wanted was to get away, to put as much distance between us and that place as possible. The drive out was tense, every shadow a threat, every bump in the road a reminder of the night before. When we finally reached the main road, we did not stop until we were back in town. We never spoke of what happened that night. Not really. If someone tried to bring it up, we changed the subject. The cabin was left to rot, the keys buried in a drawer, but the memory lingered. I stopped camping, stopped hiking, stopped going anywhere near the Barrens. Rachel moved away, and Chris and I drifted apart. The woods had taken something from us, our bravado, our sense of safety, our friendship. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of that cabin. I dream of the screams in the dark, the footsteps circling, the feeling of being watched by something that should not exist. I wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. People ask why I never go back. I tell them I grew out of it, that life got busy, that the woods lost their charm. But the truth is simpler. Some places are not meant to be tamed. Some stories are warnings, not invitations. If you ever find yourself in the Pine Barrens and the night grows too quiet, remember our story. Remember that the woods have a memory, and sometimes they remember you.